Hello, welcome to Model Kit Stuff and welcome to the next episode in our build of the Endeavour by Amati. Now, in today's episode, we're not going to be tackling one of the instruction figures. Instead, we're going to be turning the build base into a display base. Now, earlier on, I think it was episode 2, we built this up, even though it's the last instruction in the manual, and we've been using it so far for putting our hull on when we've been storing it. But going forward, we're going to want to have the hull on this stand whilst we put the parts together. So to do that, we want to finish it off so that the hull isn't getting scratched and damaged from the hard surfaces, and so that it looks a lot more presentable, because it's going to get more difficult as we have more things on the hull to have the hull stored. So right now what I have done is I have taken the model off and put it on a soft tea towel, and that is now safely stored. It's not going to get scratched. So what you're going to need to turn this into something that is a lot more presentable, well, you're going to need some felt. Colour depends on your particular choice. I'm going for red, and I'm going for red because I'm going to be painting mine black, but you're going to need some paint, again, a colour of your choice. So first thing we need to do is remove our masking tape, which has been giving some limited protection to the model so far, and it's done a great job. I've managed to not get any scratching on the hull. Okay, so that is done, and we're back to where it was. Now the next thing we need to do is to disassemble it. Now, if you've got this built up and you're really happy with the position and it's all nice and straight, mine isn't, then what you can do is just saw flush these ends, and then we'll catch up with where you are in a minute. But for me, I've got one that's crooked, and I want to show you how to take this off, because we glued this in with wood glue, and it's pretty strong. So how do we remove this? Well, the answer is steam. So what we're going to do is we're going to boil the kettle, and as the kettle boils, we're going to pull this away. So let me show you how we're going to do that. So the steam from the kettle softens the wood glue that we've used, and that allows us then to take it off. Now the glue is still on there, there is still a witness, but let's not worry about that because we're going to sand all of this in a minute. What we can do is, where we've got this area here with the glue, we can sand that with a bit of sandpaper. So let's do that and get that nice and cleaned up. So I've got some 80 grit paper here, and we're just going to take all that wood glue off. Now wood glue is sandable, so this won't be a problem. If you used a different glue like CA, you might have more of an issue, but if you did as I asked you to do in the start and use the wood glue, then you'll be able to do this no problem at all. Now it doesn't have to be super smooth at this stage, because what we're actually doing is just getting the worst off so we can get this back on. And then with the main part here that we've taken off, we can just go in with a round file. Trim that back. Okay, so once you're happy that you've got the glue off, I'm deliberately not taking this one off because this one was square, and I'm going to show you how to cut these off in a minute. What we want to do is get this back to a point where we're happy that it's completely square and not leaning back or anything like that. So I'm squaring it on my grid there, and then with a pencil we're going to mark off the position. But what I want to do is just make sure that position is okay and everything looks straight. Yeah, so if we put a little bit of weight in the middle, that'll hold it steady, and I'm just going to mark off both the inner and the outer points. Now we can check this is square by putting something square against it. So find something that you know has a perfect 90 degrees angle. A Lego brick or something like that is a good way of doing it, and just put it up against it and make sure that it is flat all the way along. Okay, that I'm going to check the other one as well just to be sure, although I think this one is. Yeah, it is. So that is now in the perfect position. So what I want to do is actually glue that back in, but I'm not going to do that until I've cut these flush. So if you're taking both of these off, you're going to want to do this process on both ends. So what I want to do is cut that to perfect length. Okay, so using a deep wood saw, not a shallow one, using a deep one. The reason why we're using a deep one is it's going to allow us to get in here and do these. You can see it gives us plenty of room to be able to do that. I'm going to start by cutting off this one here, and we'll do the other one. You want to don't try and do two at a time. And you want to do it as straight as possible, but don't worry if you don't, because we are going to be filling the ends anyway. Now it may be that you actually like the look of them protruding a little bit, in which case you do that, you leave them out, and I'd recommend that you sand the ends and make sure they're nice and smooth, or file the ends and then sand them so you've got a really nice smooth finish. I'm just trying to make sure that we don't get the dowel from fracturing. Sometimes when you get near the end, it'll break and it'll rip some material up the length. So to avoid that, we're just cutting through all the way around, and that will keep everything nice and straight. There we go. It's a little bit more difficult with the two dowels being in place, but there you go, we've got that one off. and I'll do this other one off camera. Okay, if you're just cutting flush, I'm going to show you how to do that. Get your saw blade flat with your end piece, and you should be able to cut both of them off at the same time. Sorry for the camera shake. It's easier to do it resting on there, but when I do it resting on there, it shakes the camera. That's one flush and the other flush, and you can see how much better that looks. At least that's my opinion. Right, we can get the saw out of the way now. So what we want to do now is sand all of that nice and flush, but before we can do that, on this side we want to glue that back into place. Now, to speed things up, I am not going to use wood glue. I'm going to use some medium CA. Now, a little tip from me: if you have problems with your tops sticking on, which sometimes happen, I try and wipe them, but sometimes it's difficult. A pair of nutcrackers. I did once do a video on this as a modelling tool. I keep this on my desk. This is not one that I use for cracking nuts. This is one that, well, it predates me. My parents used it at Christmas when I was a kid. That's how I remember it. But it has a nice serrated edge in there, and it's great for gripping all sorts of bottle tops, and just happens to be perfect for the Rocket CA glue. So you can give that a squeeze and it gives you extra leverage and you'll get your top off. So there's a little tip. Nutcracker, I never don't have a nutcracker on my desk. Okay, and you can see my top's actually glued into there, and if I had more glue in there, I'd recap it, but I'm not going to. So we want to put some CA glue in, and what we're going to do is we're going to put it in the hole and then put the dowel into it. There we go. So we have some glue on there, and just going to rub that round on the inside. Dropped off before I could pick my piece up, so we'll do that again. That should be enough. Now, CA glue, I know it says it's got a 5-second curing time and what have you, but it's not going to cure until you get two parts together. It'll sit quite comfortably for a little while. Right, okay. And we're just going to check that that is still perfectly square, which it wasn't, but it is now. There we go. So we'll leave that for a moment to dry. Okay, so with our stand back together and exactly as we want it, we can now tidy it up. So I'm using an 80 grit here, and what we want to do is all these sides that we didn't sand particularly previously, we want to make nice and smooth. So we don't need to get rid of all the scorching, we just need it to be smooth under your finger, ready for paint. There you go, that's nice and smooth, that's all it takes. Now if you want, you can round the corners off if you like. I'm not going to. Also, if you want, you can cut these to a shape that better fits the hull. Again, I'm not going to, because we're going to put some felt on there and that's going to do a lot of that work for us, to be honest. So make sure that we do all of those edges. Now, on the inside, it's really about making sure it's nice and flat and we've got a good surface for glue, because these are not going to be exposed. Okay, and we won't be painting these inside surfaces because we want to be able to bond directly to the wood there. But here, we're going to be painting it, and the paint's going to show up any issues if it's not nice and smooth. And then we're going to do the same on the end. We're just going to go against the direction of the grain, which will make it feel smoother. And that's all it takes. That feels nice and smooth to the touch now. What we don't want is to get too zealous and round these edges off. We want to keep everything nice and crisp. So be very, very careful. Now we want to do the same thing with the dowels. So we're just going to wrap some sanding paper around it. It's the same paper that we've used. And we're just going to go up and down and get them nice and smooth. Now this is a little bit more tricky, but once you get in the swing of it, you'll find it doesn't take that long. So all I've done is wrapped it around and I'm pinching the two sides, and then we're going to go round the dowel so we know that we've covered it properly. And then we're going to sand the inside of this as well. If you can't go against the grain, go in a circular motion, and that effectively does the same thing. By going against the grain, you just take down the little lumps, that the ridges that are caused by the grain, and it makes it feel smoother quicker. If you go with the grain, you'll have to do a lot more sanding. So you get the idea. I'm going to carry on doing that, and then I'll come back to you when we're ready for filling. So even if you've just sawn the ends off and got them perfectly smooth, you're still going to need to do some filling, because the diameter of the dowel is smaller than the diameter of the laser cut hole in this end piece. And we don't want those gaps. We want this all totally smooth. Now, I do recommend that you use a wood filler for this job, because if you use something like this modelling filler designed for plastic models, there is a risk, because it dries very, very hard, there is a risk that you can damage the wood sanding it away, because you've got to do a lot of sanding. That you can actually do more damage than good. It's always important to understand how hard your filler is going to be compared to the material you're filling. So if we put milliput in this, for example, that sets much harder than the wood, and you end up sanding the wood away more than you do sanding the filler away, and you can make a real mess. So you really want a wood filler. It doesn't really matter for this sort of job which type. I mean, there's lots of different types. This is a fine grain filler, which is hard, and I mix it with a little bit of water and make a paste. You can see it's like a hard dust, and it's great for grain filling and things like that. But what we're going to use today is this. It's called Wonderfill by Deluxe Materials, and it's for both wood and foam. So this is great for people that do dioramas and things like that and are using foam. So we're going to use that today. It's a nice light filler, but like I say, there's lots of wood fillers on the market, so it's partly whatever you can get your hands on. So we'll just take that off, plop that in there, And what we're going to do is just get... Oh, it's gone hard. Oh, how annoying. Oh, the whole thing has gone hard. Okay. Well, this is warts and all, so we won't be using Wonderfill because, yeah, that is disappointing. Right, to fill it, we really want to use a wood glue. So even if you've, a wood filler I should say, even if you've sanded this nice and smooth, we've still got a little hole because the diameter of the dowel is less than the diameter of the laser cut hole. And if you've done a bit of a job and you've got pits and bits and pieces and it's uneven in the end, we need to do exactly the same. So I recommend a wood filler rather than a plastic filler, because plastic fillers can dry much harder than the wood, and then as you're sanding it, you're sanding more wood away than filler, and you never get it flat, and it can ruin what you're doing. Whereas wood fillers are designed for the job and they're nice and light. So there we go. Now this one will, this particular wood filler that I'm using, it doesn't matter which type you use particularly, it's very, very fine, so it'll actually fill your grain as well, so you can get it totally smooth if you want to. It's not what I'm trying to achieve, so we'll just overfill it because we're going to sand it back. Okay, so that's all we need to do, and then when this dries and we sand it, it should fill nicely. Now I actually have a little bit of damage on here, which I must have done with some mold grips when we were putting it in the kettle, so I'm going to fill that as well. Okay, so yeah, if you've got gaps, that's fine. It doesn't take much to fill them up, and then that gets it looking nice and smooth on the end there. There we go. So we can leave that to dry, and when it's dry, we'll sand it off very gently, and then we're ready for paint. Okay, while our filler is drying off, and you'll know when it's dry because it changes colour, you can see where it was thinner, it's gone a light colour. So when it's gone that colour uniformly, we know that the filler is dry enough to sand. Bear in mind that you've got some filler in the crack there that might still be soft, so be careful and leave it a bit longer just to be sure. But while that's doing, we can now cut our felt. Now we're going to use the felt in these areas here to give cushioning to stop the hull being scratched, and it's also going to give grab, and it's going to sort of you're going to be able to push the hull down slightly, and the felt compacts, and as it compacts it gets tighter and it sort of locks it all into place. You will be able to lift the model out again, of course you will, but it just holds it really nicely, stops it slipping around because of the friction that it creates. So what you want to do is get your piece of felt and get a nice straight edge. If you've not got a straight edge, then cut one in. I have just cut this in against the grid on my cutting mat to make sure that it's nice and straight. Now we're 4mm wide across here, so that's how wide we need to do it. So what I'm going to do is, in the first instance, I'm going to cut 4mm. There we go. And I'm just going to actually cut that little bit out so we've got a visual guide. It's a bit difficult to see where you've cut felt, I always find. So cutting that little bit out, that means I know where I am. And we're going to do, because we've got a rounded end here, which is how this material came to me. And I've had this a long time. I've used it since I was a teenager. I have some other colours as well, green and things like that. Many years ago I made a chess set and put green felt on, and then I realised that was really good for going underneath some of my display bases. So I'm going to cut a square out there as well. Okay. Okay, and I'm just going to double check that my measurement is correct. So we now have a point to go to cut a strip of this. So what we're going to do is again use the grid to make sure that we are bang on, and away we go. So I'm really managing to slip. Tell you what we'll do it the other way around. I can only cut from left to right, but we can turn it the other way around, can't we? Get that on there like that. Get that level with the grid. Hopefully I remember to cut this messing about out. Right, there we go. So, holding the rule down really tightly and just lightly scoring to start, then we can get some momentum and press a bit harder, and eventually our knife, you'll see I'm using one of my different knife blades for this job, will cut through it. You can always go in with a pair of scissors to finish the job off, which I think is what I'm going to do to give me a nice flat edge. There we go. So we've got our strip, and what we need to do now is cut it to length. So I'm going to put it right in to the bottom of our piece here, like so. And we can always trim this if it overhangs a little bit. So I can see where my end point is. There. So if I just hold that in place, I can just cut that off with a pair of scissors. So that's my first one in, and when we glue it down, that'll look all nice, and against the black it'll look really quite classy, I think. So that's the first one. We'll do the same again with this one. So we've got two long pieces that are going to go and fill in there. These will be shorter pieces. This is for the bow end. So exactly the same process. Mark it out, cut it out with a pair of scissors. It doesn't need to be quite so long, so let's just measure how long that needs to be. That is 2.7 centimeters. Okay, so if we do 6, we know we've got some wriggle room there then. There we go. And once again, we'll mark out 4 centimeters, so we've got a little visual aid there. Okay. Once again, get it on the grid. Make sure I can see the grid line there. Yeah. Okay, that should be enough to do both of those. So let's just put it in. Yeah, plenty. Plenty. So rather than doing that in 2 parts, we could glue that in 1 part and then trim it. So we'll leave it like that for now. So that's our felt cut. And we can look at this, and that one's ready to sand, these ones less so. So I'm just going to sand this one to show you the process, and then I'll come back to you when they're all sanded. So what we're going to do, it's the same paper that we've used for sanding the wood. And what we're going to do is we're just going to go this time in the direction of the grain. I'll start on the outside where it's thinnest and then move into the middle and across it. Now, I am not pushing really hard here. I am very lightly touching this because wood filler is very delicate and it sands away really easily, as you can see. And then we can come back in the opposite direction and just go over the filled area. And there we have it, nice and smooth. And that's job done. So we're ready for paint. So I'll come back to you when the rest of them are sanded and we can crack on. So we have done our filling and we're happy that it's nice and smooth. And sometimes these things can feel smooth, they can look smooth, and when you put the paint on, they're not quite as perfect as you want. If that happens, all you need to do is revisit your filling process, fill the unevenness again, go back over it and paint it again. You don't need to mess around and strip all the paint off or anything. Just fill it over the top and keep doing it until you're happy it's smooth enough for you. So I'm using Admiralty models, Admiralty paints I should say, dull black. These are some of the very, very best paints, if not the best paints you can get for wooden model ships. It's either this or you're using Humbrol enamels. They're the 2 best. We've used modelers paints so far on the hull, but now we're painting wood. I'm reverting back to my preferred paint brand for wooden ships. Now they make a range of paints which pretty much cover the Admiralty paint range. So for Royal Navy ships of the 18th century, they pretty much got them covered, although you can't get the correct colours for HMS Victory. But yeah, they if you do British ships, you've got you covered. If you've got to do Spanish and French ships, you might want to look at enamel paints. Anyway, we digress slightly. So we're using this. They're great paints for wood, and we can go in and we can just paint that down. You're going to need more than 1 coat. Obviously, the wood absorbs it fairly quickly, so by the time you've sort of gone from one end to another, it's not going to take long before you can put another coat down. And we want to do these edges as well. And because the paint soaks in, where you've got the laminations in the plywood, you will see those until you've put 2, maybe even 3 coats over it. So I'm painting in the direction of the wood grain. That ensures that I'm pushing with the bristles of the brush the paint into the grain. If I go over that way, you can see how it doesn't go down so well. So always paint wood in the direction of the grain. Though having said that, it's a bit less important on ends. And then when we get to the dowel, once again, we paint in the direction of the wood grain. And if you're not sure, just have a good look and you'll see, when you look closely, that the wood is running in a direction, and that's what we mean by the wood grain, the direction the wood goes in. I think most people probably understand that, but I do have to account for complete novices and youngsters. Something quite therapeutic about brush painting. So there you go, you get the idea. We're going to paint the whole thing in black. You may have a different colour, but you can see how this is drying. This is now touch dry. So I could actually go over this again, but what we'll do is we'll paint everything in the black, and once it's I've got to the end of it, we'll start from the same point again, give it a second and third coat. I do thin this down a little bit. You can thin it with water because it's quite a thick paint in its own right. But yeah, I'll carry on and I'll show you what this looks like when we're ready to put our felt on. So with our paint dry, hopefully, I've left it long enough, we're able to finish this stand now with adding the felt. So this is a medium CA glue, so medium super glue, and we're just going to cover that surface that the felt's going to go on. There we go. Then I am going to want to hold this down in the middle because we're using a single piece, so we can just use the back of a knife blade for that. So I'm just going to fold it in half, so we've got a loop, put the knife blade in, and that'll be our midway point. So push it down at the bottom so it's nice and tight into that bottom bit there, and get it nicely aligned. You do have a moment to play with it and make sure that it's nice and straight and squarely on the wood. There we go. So yeah, that looks fine. Okay, and then we can come and do this side while that's drying. Make sure you get right up to the top. And once your model's on here, you're probably not going to be moving it off and on very often. I sometimes, I have a couple of models on stands like this that have done it in this exact same way, and I occasionally take them off to dust the stand, but not very often. Right. This one's a little bit more tricky because we need to make sure that we're pushing it into place right at the bottom there as well, that we join the two up. So I'm just using this knife blade to push the felt in place. I'll put this other side on. There we go. There we go. So that's our felt on there. And this should be nice and dry on there now. So we can take that out of the way and we can give it a trim up. Now it is tempting when you see how I've done this to think, well, actually I could put it on wider and then just trim it down. The problem with that is you are almost definitely going to nick the wood and catch the paint and scuff the paint, and then you're having to touch up. So despite the urge to do it, it's better to have trimmed these to scale beforehand, but we didn't trim the length of these, so I'm going to very carefully do that now. There we go. And that looks great. So that is it. That is our base done. It's all painted up. It looks fantastic. The red velvet is set off nicely by the black. So all that remains is for us to put our model back on it. Like so. Right, I'm going to take a photograph of this so you can see what it looks like, but I will try and show you on camera. There you go. And I think that looks really good. Now, when we come to the end, we might have a look at making a name tag for it, which we could possibly do from the box. So we'll have a look at that right at the end of the build. Well, that completes this week's episode of our Endeavour build by Amati. In the next episode, we'll be looking at figure 13 and building the next skylight. We'll also then look at the plans and look at installing the skylights onto the boat and how we're going about doing that. We've also got to permanently install the cabin as well. So we can do all of those things in next week's episode. So until then, you enjoy your modelling. I hope this was really helpful and useful and that you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you very soon. Bye for now. Thanks for watching. Please hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't done so. It's free, and that way you won't miss my first impressions, my tool reviews, my product reviews, and any of my builds, including wooden model kits as well as plastic. It's all free, and if you'd like to support the channel, you can hit my PayPal link in the text below. Every pound goes straight into the channel to keep the cameras rolling and to do more fun stuff for you to watch.